Hello, Donovan Westwater. This is it should be part three. Really, it's part three and part four, Grassland. So, the reason for this is because part three, as I kind of alluded to last time, is just a summary of what literally everything in Mario 3 does, with some trivia, with not even that much trivia. It feels like a wiki article pasted with little commentary into uh, this book. And it's kind of redundant anyway because he even mentions that, well, people probably already know Mario, so I don't need to worry about explaining things again, but still feels the need to do this anyway. Like, he keeps convincing himself, talking himself in the book, into doing silly things like this. And it doesn't matter because he'll keep kind of re explaining things because he loves re explaining things. The result is that there's not much to say about part three. I did take some notes because there are some things that I think that like highlight the egregiousness of the explaining. And there's something that I think are a bit amusing, but I'm going to try to put the energy more into the Grassland, the part four section. So let's start with part three. Then I'll elaborate more on the structure of part four and my thoughts on how to do that going forward. Um, so part three specifically, one of the things that's funny is that he goes on this bit in the beginning when he's talking about summarizing the plot, about talking about how it's more of a war story, more the conflict's expanded, that sort of thing. Which, you know, sure, it's not. He's not doing anything with that. He's just saying it as if like that, just for as a fun bit of flavor almost. Like I don't know. I feel like if you're going to make the point of, I mean, it would be silly if you took that and try to make a big point out of nowhere. Like this is a war story about war or something. Which are he kind of alludes back to this framing device of this being more of a militaristic world a little bit, but he's doing nothing with this really. I Part of me wants to make fun of that premise alone, but I don't think that's fair. Um, Back to the explaining issue very quick. There's a bit where, no joke, he explains the concept of pixels in a game, like in general, specifically when talking about the concept of 8-bit, which he doesn't need to explain in any. This never needs to be explained, even to people who didn't know what this means, because it doesn't. It's not relevant. So it's just fun trivia, but it's not. It's just keeping him lost in these digressions. He can't really keep focus. He's like, this is a problem throughout this entire book. He struggles to keep focus in general. Part three, I think, is the epitome of his issues here because he feels the need to put this digression, re-explaining a bunch of information that doesn't need to be explained basically to anyone. Um, and in fact, it made me, in this part um, specifically, the pixels 8-bit and the part right afterwards where he explains the concept of a 2D side scroller, including the 2D bit, like including what 2D in a game means. Like, oh, you only have up, down, left, right, background, foreground thing. That's insane to me that you would feel the need to explain something so pre facie, self explanatory, it's so obvious, so like self-apparent. I don't need to explain it. If you've seen video games before, you should know what that is. That it's not that old a concept. Excuse me. So it's weird. It's very odd. It, it's very gratuitous at this point. And also he doesn't. There's bits that this is a bit nitpicky, but there are bits that he could maybe elaborate a little bit on. That if he's going to go into all this trivia, like he's playing on a Wii, he's playing an emulated version that's on the Wii store of this game of Mario Brothers 3. And I would point out, like, playing a game on a Wii versus playing it on a NES controller, different, similar. I would point out like how the console changes things, or if it changes anything at all. Um, if you're going to go this granular, you might as well point that out, right? I mean, that seems pretty big deal. Like when you watch even like Nitrorad, will point out complications of hardware or emulation or how it changes the little details of things. And if you're catering to this like retro crowd, that matters to them. So it's a weird thing to leave out. Like he'll mention that he's playing on the Wiimote, but he won't elaborate on what that really does to the game, if anything at all. Even just to say that it does nothing because they're similar controls, which arguably is still not true because software-wise, they're still different things. Being on a cartridge is still different than being emulated. There are some nuances to that. The only thing I really need to say here, the last thing, which is ironically a bit redundant to say, but I still think it's kind of funny and hammers this point home. He explains what all the blocks are, like all of them, in a list. I don't have words for that. Like, why? Why? Part 4, the actual analysis bit. Spoiler alert, it's not really an analysis. It's more like a mix of a sort of let's play, walkthrough, and journal all wrapped into one. And there's very little actual analysis. A lot of it is just him describing what is happening in the moment, and then occasionally adding some commentary on that, or some trivia, or he'll describe it, then he'll put some trivia next to it. He loves trivia. Again, he can't keep focus. He keeps talking about things, these extra little details, because they're fun, but they're not amounting to anything. They're not building a story with this. And it seems like the journal entries are kind of building this story about his grandmother, alluding to her, and basically she's falling ill, and it's stressing him out, and he's coping by playing the game, which none of this he's not really tying these things in at all. And when he actually starts bringing that bit up, like he's talking, wide-eyed about the game, and then wham, we get that journal entry. It's like just a shift. Which tone shifts that are big, that's fine. Erratic tone shifts are fine if they amount to something, right? But I'm not getting a sense that he's doing much with that shift beyond maybe the shock of it, or like, oh, look at me, my happy time. It's like it's a bit trite, it's a bit obvious, that conceit. which I know is harsh to say about given the circumstances at that moment, but like you're structuring the story, you can control what you put in and put out. So I'm not sold on this narrative thread so far. But I do think it's probably the most interesting part so far. To break down it more linearly, the part 4 I got to, which I'm just doing Grassland. I'm going to do it world by world because that's how he does it. He's doing this world by world, level by level. I'm not going that granular. We're just going to do world by world. I think we'll have enough pages to do that. I might bundle the worlds together if I feel like it, or I think there's not enough interesting things to say, to fill up its own part. But in this case, combining part 3, I think will be fine. This is just a fun detail. I just find, I don't know what to really make of this, but it was noteworthy to me at least. While he was doing this, he had to do it, first off, he has to do it at night because the family's asleep and he can't do it in the day, I guess because he's moving, right? He's moving stuff. And he needs to do this project on the side, I guess. So he has to do it while the parents are sleeping because see, the idea, what's happening in the background right now is that he's moving out of his parents' house into a new apartment because his escapist money is actually letting him be financially independent in that way, which good for him. So he's moving out, and that's like the thread. That's part of this thread of the journal entries. It's him moving out, his day-to-day, and some stuff about his grandmother, which, like I said, contrasts with the, him reliving his childhood with this game, which he points out explicitly. We'll get into that later. But anyway, while he's doing that, though, he creates his own little bedtime cocktail, which is a combination of Jack Daniels, Captain Morgan, and Schweppes, which, why would you want to drink while playing? Like, I know this is partly for fun, but it's still work, right? And you want to be able to remember and keep the details straight, right, of what you're playing. I would be a little worried. I would be worried about forgetting things or my memory being messed up or getting too drunk or, I'd be a little nervous. And I don't think he's getting drunk or anything. He's not trying to. He has restraint. I don't know. Maybe I'm being. This is what I mean why I don't know what to make of it, because I don't know if I'm just being weirdly judgy or paranoid, but I just felt that that's an interesting detail to me. It's interesting that he's drinking while playing Mario. So with Grassland, first off, when we start off with Grassland, he describes the intro and aesthetics of the opening starting menu. He's describing it, he's summarizing it. We get to the world to level 1-1. You would think the obvious thing what you would do is say, okay, here's how level 1-1 teaches you how to play. It would make sense. He's trying to teach, and basically, given that he keeps repeating stuff, I'm assuming he's trying to talk to a new audience, or people, new whatever. Making it about how does World 1-1 teach you how to play seems like a really an easy one. That's where I thought he was going with this. A little game design 101, but it fits the energy he's bringing to this. I think that's fine. If that was what he was doing, which it's not. Actually, what he's doing is he talks about that. He mentions the detail that, these levels are made last because they have to know how to make the game and how all the elements work. And it's like, yeah, but also it's because part of that is making a good tutorial. So why don't you talk about that? He just brushes past it. Like he has this great opportunity to talk about game design, and he's just not interested in it. He just moves past it, which I find odd, very odd. Um, yeah. So there's a lot of I mentioned earlier. There's a bunch of trivia, like, but like the kind of trivia you would get out of a game magazine from the 80s. Like he's memorized it for like he's like a has an encyclopedic knowledge of Nintendo Power trivia, and he's just reciting it back to you, which I don't hate. I'm not a Mario expert. A lot of this is stuff that I basically already know. There's occasionally stuff that I don't, like very occasionally. So I don't hate this, but it shouldn't be here. But then again, I don't know if I don't know what his focus really is. I think he likes the trivia more than he likes the basic conceit, which at that point he should just write a Mario trivia book for kids, which I think would be exactly what he wants, because he wants to explain this. He wants to give it to people who aren't as familiar with this as him as he is, and the fact he keeps re-explaining stuff over and over, or he feels the need to explain so much, it would be perfect for an audience of children who have very far less familiarity with Mario in a general pop cultural sense because they're younger children. So a trivia book for kids about Mario, I think he would be great at writing. But that is not what this is. Um, so uh, here's a little detail. When talking about level 1, 2, one of the first things he mentions is that he likes a little slide animation that you can do with Mario when you crouch on an incline. He slides down, and he's like, wow, what whimsy. How the whimsy of Mario. And I'm like, yep, that's whimsical. That's whimsical, right? I kind of feel I can, I'm being a little mean here, but I get it. I think this bit is good. I wish he had more of this, more often, more frequently. If he was just talking about like the ways that this game is full of charm and wonder and childlike joy, even if it's schmaltzy, I would get it, and I do get it. It makes so much sense to do that story. If he made the book, reframed it as like this is my oddest, this is what makes Mario so special. Here are the things that make it special. We'll go bit by bit, and I explain X, Y, and Z makes it special. The actual gameplay bits, he's not really interested in. In fact, earlier on, the way he talks about Mario, he's talking about the lore and the world and the vibes, along with the gameplay. The fantasy of Mario is just as important to him as anything else. So sell me on that fantasy. Talk about that fantasy. Don't just assume that I'm on the same page as he is, or in this case, at the same page as you. You being Bob. I think that's what bothers me a bit about some of the stuff beforehand. He's just, I can feel the enthusiasm, but he's not. It doesn't feel like he's sharing it quite with me. He's not good at sharing it. He's good in basking it, but not sharing it. In fact, a great example of what I'm saying here in my notes is that when he talks about there's a bit where you can pick which world you're going to go to next, because there are pipes that can let you skip. It's a classic Mario thing, pipes that let you skip levels. And he talks about which one am I going to go? Which one am I going to go? And he talks about what he felt as a child, or he might have felt as a child, because he doesn't quite remember, obviously. But what he might have felt as a child picking which one, and what he picked and why. And I feel that bit, cute bit, I see you're selling me on it now a little bit. You're selling me on it a bit. I kind of get it. You're keeping it from the frame of mind of a child, and I can understand that. So get rid of all of this, cut down on the visual explanation that we can't see. Focus on this. This stuff's the good bit. This stuff would be more compelling, and I think people would like it more by comparison. But yeah, it's becoming clear by this point. Um, um, there's a sky level. It's blank. Because it's blank, it implies secrets. And he's like, that's a classic Mario thing. And I'm like, that's true. But it's also, at this point, a very classic game thing. Empty space is usually an indicator of secrets. By this point, it's a very classic indicator of secrets. Which, again, doesn't take a moment to illustrate that or connect it back to the present day. Another thing he could be doing, too, for a guy who talks about relevance and the importance of Mario, he just treats it as if that's just like inherently true, and that's just something we have to accept, rather than explaining it, which would be to be a moment. It's a common trope that this is part of a cultural idea of using negative space to indicate secrets. After all, you're expecting a lot of stuff to happen in the level, then you go to this flat plane. Why isn't there anything to do? Wait, secret. Very classic thing. Wish he really, would lean into that kind of stuff. Without it, it's very thin and repetitive. I believe we're about to get one of the first journal entries. Here he goes to the gym, and part of what makes the going to the gym easier is he's watching a bunch of Transformers cartoons while doing so. And he's talking about, I have this desire to play another level again, just like I did as a child. He's like laying this idea of retreating into the past as a coping mechanism thing. He's laying that seed pretty hard here. But what's he planning to pay this off with? I'm not confident he's going to be able to. I don't know what he's going to really do to pay this off or tie this back in, given that he hasn't really been quite doing this. It's to be fair, I'm being a little too harsh, I think, because you already can tell. Well, hold on. Let me give some context first, because I think I'm jumping a little ahead of myself. So in this journal entry, he talks about that, and jumping ahead a little bit to properly keep his thought together. In another journal entry later, we'll get the grandmother bit. The grandmother goes to hospital. It's not serious, he's told, but he's still obviously worried. And he mentions that he's coping. He puts the coping in quotations. Coping with stress the same way he did as a child, and that's not lost on him. The interesting thing to me is that he put the coping in quotes, because you're like half coping, I guess, because it's not serious. I feel like he's uncomfortable admitting that vulnerability. At least to me, that's what it feels like. I will explain, given his discomfort with admitting that his problems in childhood were serious, which they clearly were. To get back to his description of the game, something that happens after the first journal entry is that he comments on Mario's design, specifically that Mario has a very round design, and he comments how early on he was really fat, and now he's more thin. He's gotten thinner over time, which, I mean that is true. That's an interesting detail. really don't know what to really make of that. He doesn't really like comment on that as a negative or a positive thing. He just thinks that, hey, he's gotten around. He's gotten less around, rather. I guess he's kind of liking this version of his round design, I guess is what he's really saying. He blames his bad gaming skills on either drinking. He's like, oh, it must be my drink. He's basically setting up a joke where he's like, I pretend that it's the drinking when it's probably my age. And I would point out, it's actually the fact that you haven't played games much until relatively recently. I think that's a way bigger shift, a way bigger reason. So it's not really age, it's just being very out of practice and being kind of insular with what games you like. And not even, oh, right. There's this bit where he talks about the fortress and the Fortress of World 1. Basically, it's just Bowser's castle. It's like the midway point. And there's a bit where you expect to fight Bowser, like in the original Mario, but it's instead the ceiling starts to lower and threaten to crush you. And that is, playing on the expectations of what a Mario level is. And it's playing and subverting, and it's setting up expectations and then subverting and playing with them to mess with you in fun ways. Classic thing. That's a classic verb of game design. Very useful idea. You need to set something up and then be able to subvert it or mess with it later. Movie Bob does not elaborate on that. He mentions that, oh, this is a fun twist, but he doesn't use that as a teaching moment, which I think would be relevant to the kind of thing he says that he wants, at least to some of the things he aspires to be early on, talking about how the design makes it so good and such. It's this big missed opportunity, in my opinion. And I wish he didn't do things like talk about the wizard again, which is what he does around this bit, because this is the scene that shows up in the wizard. And he's like, this is the one thing I find interesting about this digression, which I otherwise is rehashing stuff we've heard. He talks about how the scene where we see Giant Land, yeah, it's terrible in the movie, but the hype of that as a marketing thing is so much more cool of seeing Giant World than cinematic than cinematic logic. And that's kind of chilling. Let's not exaggerate here. But it is interesting because so much of what people claim they don't like about the AAA industry, I would argue, comes back to this notion of hype, of everything having to be about hype, and of hype creating these paranoid, this culture that is raised to the moon, and if there's disappointment, it's naturally going to blow up and hurt all the people who on the ground, the people on the ground who work on the game are going to feel the blunt of this hype strategy. They're going to feel that burn. And it leads to a bunch of paranoia and presumptions of guilt and malicious, and generally makes developers' lives arguably worse. There's a paranoid culture that has developed. And you could trace that back right to stuff like this, in a way, these grandiose moments of spectacle over anything of substance. And the wizard is never going to be a thing of artistic, and it's not this thing where I'm not complaining that. I think it's interesting that he's basically saying at this moment of my excitement was more important than this ever being a good movie. It's just a weird thought, like the idea that marketing should ever matter more than making a good, coherent thing. Which is clearly, if we see like later on, like a Lego movie, like movies which are these more that have clear brand and commercial potential, you know, subvert that by actually being good. And I think it puts a testament to that moment. I just find, it's not necessary. You don't need it. It's not one or the other. You don't need it to be bad to be a bad marketing vehicle. But I get what it's saying though. Like basically, seeing a glimpse of this movie, this pre-release footage, was more important than it being good in the moment. But again, it's crazy how we get attached to hype in marketing and ads and consumerism. That's why I mean it's a little chilling. It's a little chilling. I think is strong. That's really strong, but it's disconcerting, I guess. Chilling, I think, would be like hearing someone just talk about preparing becoming a helicopter gunner by playing Call of Duty and getting kill streaks. That to me is genuinely chilling, um, for obvious reasons. Like that is a story I've heard before. This, I think, by comparison, is more banal. Still, something to think about. Um, this is actually one of the few times he mentions a game design trick. We're jumping a little bit ahead. By this point, after the wizard who does the grandmother's letter, he mentions that again. And oh, not again, but he mentions that his grandmother, and then he mentions this trick that the game's playing where you rush to the end. But if you rush to the end, there's an enemy that shows up and it will jump at you by surprise. It'll punish you for being too eager, essentially. It's playing with you. You're not out of the woods yet. He mentions that and describes that situation when it's happening. And I like that as a little moment. I wish he did more of that. This bit, though, I did quote. So he gets to his airship, and we get some juicy quotes. Remember how I mentioned there's this, he's trying to make this idea that the cartoony machines are a sign of a more militaristic imperial approach. Well, when speaking about Bowser's airship, Movie Bob writes, Bowser isn't just waiting for you to come fight him this time. He militarized his operation. The previous games were adventures. This time, it's war. That is funny and such wonderful melodrama. You gotta love it. Only Movie Bob can write like that. Since this is where I made the connection that he's telling this like a child, like he's talking to a child, which is why I think he would be better writing off a kid's book than a book for adults. I don't think he cares about writing to adults in this instance. I think he would be genuinely making something more interesting and more powerful writing to kids. This is my hot take. I stand by this hot take for this book. At the end of this bit, the last bit before he gets to Desert Land, as he mentioned, one of the last bits I wrote down at least was he likes this thing called Princess Peach's letters. Like she has these letters in the game, and he goes when describing it. He likes how it paints a picture of the broader stakes of his quest, and it paints the relationship, fleshes it out a bit. He describes it as, quote, men on a mission, knights in overalls, questing and battling at the behest of a royal decree, which is accurate. That is accurate. That's accurate. Um, there's something about that. Okay, so let me give you some context. There is this little bit of a, during this controversy with Lindsay Ellis, this was years ago, it was one of the reasons, it was the reason that she stepped away from YouTube and went to writing and then Nebula only. Lindsay Ellis got into this firestorm, and during this tweet firestorm over some, frankly, still silly tweets, which I think are silly but not enough to be run off of Twitter worthy. During that firestorm, she is telling off some people, and the movie Bob comes in saying, she's telling off some people for saying, we're not your friends. And he goes, yeah, not like you and me. And he posts a picture of him and her, from a con. And she goes, look, Bob, we're not friends. Meeting you at a con doesn't make us friends. You can't take, I keep soft blocking you several times. You can't take the hint. Please leave me alone. And it was like surprisingly, firm, surprisingly firm, maybe even a little harsh. But you can understand it based on the context, though, right? Because he keeps associating her with him as if they know each other when they clearly don't. He's just overstepping he's overstepping his boundaries and creating this parasocial thing. And in that light, it reframes a lot of what he would describe her, as colleague, friend of the show, in a new light, right? And you can argue that he has this habit, and I've seen some people argue that he has this white knighty element to him, of just like this sort of fedora tipper energy when it comes to some women. And unfortunately, I can't, besides the Lindsay Ellis experience, where I feel like that energy you can kind of feel, I can't really think of other examples, so I'll take this with a huge grain of salt. I don't really know if it's a pattern. But him talking about this, this fantasy of Mario's White Knight, and he wants to be Mario. Like, we know that he wants to be like Mario as this defender of justice. There's this chivalry, gamer's chivalry fantasy that I feel like he's really attracted to here in specific. And that, I don't know, that, when I read that bit, it made me think of the Lindsay Ellis stuff. So, Desertland, things to look forward to. Another journal entry about the issues with his grandmother as she gets a pacemaker. Not much more of, basically, he's arguing that the levels design is different. It's not like Mario's one, like the aesthetic and level design is different from Mario's 1 and 2 now. It's branching out. And yeah, we're going to see the start of the current Mario tradition of the second world always being a desert world and having a lot of these tropes begin. So look forward to that. I think I'll do Desert World and whatever the one after that is into one part. Until then, I'll see everyone later.